In 1957, a young actor was traveling home from a party at his brother's house across the back roads of rural Long Island. At that time, there was still rural Long Island. It was a rainy night, at the proverbial dark and stormy night, and he ran out of gas. He let his car drift off to the side of the road. He knew, because he had driven the route many times, that there was an all-night gas station about a mile or two down the road. Reluctantly, he got out of the car, started the trek, and pretty soon, a large black Cadillac pulled up beside him. Window rolls down, and the man looks out at him and says, "Do you need a lift, young man?" He got in. The man didn't say much at first. He noticed the guy had a tuxedo about 2 decades too old, a pencil-thin mustache that was more 20s and 30s than it was 1957. But he accepted the ride gladly. They get to the gas station, and as he's getting out, he realizes he had left his wallet not only back in the car, but at his brother's house and had no way to pay for the gas. The man offered to give the man a couple of dollars. Gas went a lot further for $2 in those days. And he said, no, I couldn't accept. The man said, "I insist." The young actor said, "Only if you allow me to pay you back. May I have your name and address?" The man didn't want to give it, but eventually was talked into it. He took the money. The car continues down the road. The actor gets his gas. It's several days later that he finds the note in his pocket and realized he had never sent the man his money back. He thought, now it's too late to just send it in an envelope. So he decided to get in the car and drive over. He knew that area of Long Island. He goes, knocks on the door. Woman comes to the door. "May I help you?" The young man explains what had happened. A few nights earlier, the woman slams the door in his face. He knocks again. The woman reopens the door, and he tries to explain once again. The woman says, "Please, come inside." She ushers him into the living room. They sit down on the couch. She gets out the family photo album and says, "Could you pick out the man you're describing?" He says, "Oh, it's this guy right there, and that's the car that I was in." She said, "That's my husband. He died about 1 year ago this week." The man couldn't believe it. She thought she was playing a cruel trick. And then he handed her the note. It was her husband's handwriting. That actor, by the way, who was that past man we just got by, was Telly Savalas. And he told that story for many years in the talk show circuit. It was actually an instance where instead of a man picking up a ghost, he was picked up by a ghost vehicle. So, do the spirits come back? Magicians have been asking that for centuries, as has everyone else. The first recorded ghost stories are back at the time of Pliny the Elder or younger, I don't remember which. And ever since, magicians have tried to replicate some of the spirit phenomena. Some of the people in this room do that very well, as a matter of fact. I see I'm going to have to stand here to get it. We're all familiar, of course, it's your knee.
Oh, is it? Okay. Shall I cross my leg?
I wish you would. Always. We're all familiar with the phantasmagoria that eventually became Pepper's Ghost. And of course, just a century after the 1860s, when this was popularized, the 1800s, magicians were doing spook shows around the country, making luminescent cloths fly over people's heads, saying that that was ghost phenomena. So we have a unique perspective on ghost phenomena, what is or is not possible. We, of course, are in the Magic Castle. I'm not going to go through the rooms that are supposedly haunted here, because I did that in the Who's Who the other night, but this one I want to mention because it's directly above our heads. The Parlor of Prestidigitation is said to be haunted by at least 3 spirits. One of them is a gentleman who appears in his tuxedo, seated about 3 seats in from the end of the front row. Maybe it's just a coincidence that Chris Michaels died in that very seat between performances a few years ago. Another one of the people who is said to come back in the room in just recent years is Billy McComb. His apparition has never been seen, but several hosts, including Todd Gerard, have walked into the room and smelled his distinctive pipe tobacco, which he constantly smoked in the room, even though he knew he wasn't supposed to. And the other one, although we're not quite sure why he's chosen to return to the parlor, except that he is sort of nearby, is Di Vernon, the professor. Katrina, one of our cocktail waitresses, did not recognize him because she never knew the professor to know what he looked like, but she described an elderly man that she saw stooped over his arms in a very unusual manner. She saw from the back walking toward the waiting area of the parlor and vanished before her eyes. On a YouTube clip, Maria, one of our cleaning staff, translated by Jesse, told some ghost investigators of the castle that she walked into the castle one time and saw the professor sitting near the front of the room. She asked Di whether he needed anything. Instead of responding, he stood up, walked up the aisle toward where the Billy McComb seat is, as a matter of fact, turned and walked through the wall and disappeared. She was freaked by that, but she was surprised that she even saw the professor because she thought he was recuperating down at his son's place in San Diego. She didn't know at the time that Vernon had already passed over to the other side. So is the room haunted? That's just one of the stories around the castle. But let's move outside of our building. In every civilization in recorded history, there has been some group of people that it's believed they could communicate with the dead. In 1 Samuel in the Old Testament, you remember the story of King Saul, who had an upcoming battle against David and wanted to know whether he was going to win. You see, this throughout history is why people wanted to talk to the dead, because it was believed that once a person died, they passed beyond time. And as a result, they would know the past, the present, and the future. And everybody wanted to know what would happen in the future. So they thought if they could get one of those guys to come back and talk to them, they could tell them what they saw. In this instance, Saul called up the spirit of Samuel. You may remember, you Old Testament scholars, that it was forbidden by law of Moses to talk to soothsayers and wizards. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. So he was breaking his own rule when he went there. The soothsayer, the witch of Endor, recognized him. He said, no, it's okay, I'm the king, you can tell me. In that era, the way they called up the dead is she got down on her haunches, a lot of smoke, and she called up the voice. Now, modern scholarship has looked at the old Greek manuscripts from which the King James edition of the Bible was translated and realized the word witch, of Witch of Endor, actually was belly talker. So probably the Witch of Endor was a ventriloquist, not a magician, and was conjuring up the voices from beyond. But this is one of the first known instances of a wizard supposedly calling up a wizard from the other side. Then, of course, there's Delphi, the Oracle of Delphi, who would hear voices that would tell people, supplicants, of what was going to happen in the future. It's also been discovered recently that Delphi is positioned, this temple, over top of a fissure in the earth that hallucinogenic gases seep out of. Coincidence? I personally consulted this juju man in Kenya who shook his bones and read my future. He told me I was going to get married and have a large family. So, there you have it. But who knows? I'm still alive. That could happen again. But a lot of the tribal societies had a whole different belief, because they didn't have to consult the spirits in the next world. The animistic societies believed that the spirits were still here in this universe with us. As you know, they believed it's in the ground, it's in the earth, it's in a block of wood, and that's why they would make totems, carved totems out of these things, because that way the spirits would be able to come back from the other world. They could consult them that way. Let's take a look at the next society. From the Middle Ages, the medieval times, the wizards were expected to be able to conjure up from the beyond. Of course, that's why we're called conjurers, isn't it? Because it was believed we could conjure up. Even Queen Elizabeth had a court wizard, John Dee, who would tell her what was going to happen to her. Then we get to the 1800s. 1848, this woman, who at the time was 13, Kate Fox, and her sister Margaret began to get messages from the other side in the form of rappings inside of the wall. They worked out a code with 1 for yes, 2 knocks for no, to ask Mr. Splitfoot, as they found out his name was by using an alphabetical code. I'll move over this way. That Mr. Splitfoot would tell them that he was actually a peddler who was buried beneath the basement. Their mother wanted to hear the story. Soon the entire town knew. And within just 20 years, there were hundreds of seance mediums in the world who would sit around tables and use such things as spirit slates. They've already been here. Ouija boards and other methods, tambourines to give messages from the other side. And of course, at first, they had the rappings. Then they found ways for the spirits to communicate through writing, to the point that they would allow spirits to actually enter their bodies and could talk through their own voices. In the 70s, we knew there's this channeling through the Shirley MacLaine books. And of course, it continues even today. The Davenport brothers in the late 1800s. Today, John Edwards, who's crossed over from the other side. James Von Prowl. And of course, my favorite, Teresa Caputo, the Long Island medium. They all can hear from ghosts on the other side. Well, Houdini is this. Can the dead speak to the living? So, let's take a little poll. How many of you believe that ghosts exist? Before you raise your hands or before you commit yourselves, let me tell you a little story. There was a college professor who had a class in comparative religion and parapsychology, was giving a lecture similar to this in Tennessee. And he asked his class, how many of you believe in ghosts? And almost all of the students' hands went up. He then asked, how many of you have ever seen a ghost? Most of the hands go down. Now there are about 10, 12 hands up in the room. He says, how many of you have ever been touched by a ghost? Now there are only 3 hands up. And he says, I hope this isn't too personal, but has anyone here ever been intimate with a ghost? Now there's only 1 hand of a yokel kid at the back. Oh, me. The professor says, really, young man, in all the years I've been doing this talk, I have never had anyone say that they've had sex with a ghost. And he said, ghost? I thought you said goat. Now, with that in mind, how many of you believe in ghosts? I don't think we'd get many hands after that. Well, according to a Zogby poll that was taken just 2 years ago, November 2010, 37% of Americans believe in ghosts. 20% of the people who were surveyed believed that they had seen a ghost. It was because of phenomenon, anecdotes, recorded experiences, that people started to investigate whether or not any of these claims could possibly be true. And the first one dates back, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was 1882. In London, the Society for Psychical Research was started by several educated college men, professors and doctors, and other educated men in London to investigate the claims that were coming out of the seance rooms. They sat around just like magicians will sit around and think card tricks for each other. They would sit around a table and posit questions. They would say, if a ghost is a returned spirit from the beyond, why does George Washington appear sitting on a horse? Do animals also have a soul? Why does the Flying Dutchman, the ship, appear? Are you saying that inanimate objects also may have spirits, can be ghosts? And then they think of kind of kinky questions like, oh, if a ghost is just the energy spirit returned from the beyond, why aren't they naked? Was their clothing alive at one time too? What they're trying to develop is a unified theory to explain ghosts. Why some people see a ghost, other people just hear things, other people just sense a presence in the room, and other people have the hair go up on the back of their head. They think things just don't seem right. So they had to ask the basic question, what is a ghost? And to figure out what that ghost was, they also have to first eliminate what isn't a ghost. What aren't ghosts? Well, the first instance would be someone sick, a hallucination. Famously, Charles Dickens in A Christmas Carol, Scrooge thought that the ghost of Marley that appeared was just an undigested piece of potato. Here is an interesting picture of a crypt in Christchurch, Barbados, which you too can visit. It's an underground crypt, was for the Thomas Chase family. In the course of about 6 years, 6 different, well, a little longer than that, 10 years, 6 different family members were buried in there. First an aunt, 2 of Chase's daughters, and then Chase himself. Chase was a nasty man, very bad to his slaves and almost as bad to his family. When Chase's coffin, which was a lead coffin, was added and the crypt was sealed up, it was only a year later that another extended family member died. They opened up the crypt, which had a large rolling stone in the front of it, and they found that all of the coffins, other than Chase's, had moved. Of course, rumors started in the superstitious natives in Barbados that no one in the family wanted to be anywhere near Chase. So they just picked up their coffins and moved to the far corners of the crypt. They added the coffin, they straightened everything up, they put Chase's coffin, 9 men lifting, and put on top of the other ones, and they closed up the crypt again. 2 more years later, another family member was buried. This time, not only had the coffins moved, but they were leaning up against the walls. A couple of the older wooden coffins were broken open and things were dangling out. Well, by now, the natives were restless. So the governor of the island, Lord Combermere, took it upon himself to oversee the burial. First of all, he had the inside of the crypt inspected. He made sure there weren't any secret entrances. He made sure there weren't ways for water to get in, even though water could not account for lifting a lead coffin and moving it around, even if it did come up during a flood time and go back down. He put sand on the bottom of the crypt so that if anyone did sneak in, when they opened it again, they'd see footprints in there. Then they rolled the stone back in place, sealed it with plaster. He and 2 other dignitaries put their own signet rings into the plaster and waited. And waited, and no one died. So, after 9 months of waiting, they decided to check for themselves. They opened up the crypt, and every coffin inside had once again moved, to the point that they almost couldn't move the stone because one of the coffins had upended and was leaning against the inside of the stone. On the spot, Combermere ordered that all of the coffins be removed from the crypt, be dispersed to different cemeteries all around the island, and that the crypt never be used again and left open for eternity. And if you go to St. John's Parish, right outside of Christchurch, Barbados, you too can descend inside of the crypt. Now, what does this have to do with what ghosts aren't? You can sort of make out on the photograph Thomas Chase's spirit drifting out of the open crypt. Or could it possibly be that I was facing toward the sun when I took the picture? So there is the hallucination. You just see things wrong. That's one possibility. Sometimes people are crazy! A good instance of that would be the story of Sarah Winchester, who in the 1860s got married, had a daughter who died within just a few months. Her husband died within the year. Now remember, this is the 1860s. It was by now the heyday of spiritualism. She consulted a medium. She wanted to find out why her daughter and husband had been taken from her, and maybe she could talk to them again. Well, the medium had a surprise for her. They didn't die of natural causes. It was actually the spirits of innocent people who had been slaughtered by the Winchester repeating rifle who had killed her family. The medium insisted she move west to escape the ghosts, and she moved to San Jose, California, where she bought this house that was being built at the time. She believed that if she slept in a different room every night, the ghosts wouldn't find her. She would build onto the room and add dead ends, such as this doorway, which if you came out of the second level, you'd just fall out of the house. You would go up a staircase inside, and you'd suddenly hit the roof because it didn't go anywhere. She sat at table for 13 every night, ate alone. She was a bit of a recluse, but she did want to be congenial in case the ghost did want to join her for dinner. Outside the house, she planted a double row of palm trees along the drive so that she could stand between them and look to see if the ghosts were coming. And probably the thing she's most known for is she believed that as long as she kept building on the house, the ghosts would never get her. And that's why when she died in 1922, the house had 160 rooms. And you can still go up and visit it today. She probably wasn't of a sound mind. That's probably an explanation. What's interesting, though, is that today the docents, the guides, and several tourists have claimed to have seen Sarah Winchester's ghost in the house. They smell her gardenia perfume in her old bedroom. They smell the chicken soup that she liked to cook in the kitchen. And they've seen a rocking chair moving on its own in her sitting room, even when there's no breeze going on. So who knows? Maybe she has come back on her own. But in the original, she was a little off. Then there are the deliberate hoaxes, and there couldn't be a better example than this, the Amityville Horror. In late 1974 to early 1975, the George Lutz, his wife Kathleen, and their 2 children moved into this house, and almost immediately, the demonic forces are said to have started. Green goo slime would go down the staircase. Blood handwriting would appear on the walls. A priest who came to bless the house was chased away by bees. They lasted about 90 days. People would actually believe the story, which was made into the J. Anson novel in 1976, and a subsequent blockbuster movie, 2 sequels, and a TV movie. Except for Ronnie DeFeo's lawyer. Ronnie DeFeo killed his father, mother, and 4 siblings in that house 2 years before the Lutzes moved in. No one would move into that house. DeFeo's lawyer hadn't gotten paid for his defense. He concocted a story with a real estate agent, interested, an author, hoping at least in the book sales he'd make some money to pay for his legal fees. When it turned into such a hit, in 1979, when he wasn't getting a big enough cut of the movie deal, the lawyer went public and explained that the entire thing was a hoax. People don't seem to remember or know about that second part. They remember the Amityville Horror being house in Amityville, New York, on Long Island, actually being haunted, but it was a deliberate hoax. And of course we come to some of my favorites, spirit photographs. These are sort of a combination of all of the others. A hallucination or an optical illusion captured on film, a deliberate hoax, and also some people not being in the right mind to believe they really exist. They were started by a man named William Mumbler, who was an engraver, an amateur photographer, 1860s. Once again, photography was relatively new at the time, if you remember. He shot a self-portrait and then shot a ghostly image of his cousin over his shoulder. Being no fool, he said, I could make a lot of money selling these. A lot of people had just lost a lot of their family in the Civil War and wanted to see images and proof that their family survived death. This is probably his most famous photo of Mary Todd Lincoln and Honest Abe over her shoulders. The Lincolns, of course, believed in spiritualism, or at least conducted seances in the White House, it's said. Oh, here's another spirit photo. Harry Houdini, the great Ghostbuster himself. He also asked Abe to pose with him. Let's see if there are any other spirit photos. Fortunately, Pam Young happened to be in Irma's room the day she decided to manifest for us. So we have that photograph as well. All deliberate fakes. As a matter of fact, today, there are all sorts of ways that spirits are supposedly captured. There are what they call EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, captured on audio tape. Sean McMaster, I believe, is here tonight. Sean McMaster captured a voice which is unexplainable on a ghost hunt on a haunted bridge up in Ojai. You can ask him yourself about that story if you want to hear it later. There is, of course, the video cameras that are being used, and especially infrared cameras that are being used by the guys on Ghost Hunter and the TV shows like that today. And a thing called an EMF detector, an electronic magnetic field detector. It's believed that ghosts, since they have no corporeal substance, must be pure energy. And therefore, any kind of energy disturbance in the room should be able to be picked up by electromagnetic field detectors. So there are different ways, not just cameras, that ghost phenomena are supposedly picked up. But this is one of the most unusual photos, and so far has not been discounted. In 1936, a photographer was commissioned to do a photo essay of the grand stately mansions of England. He was in Raynham Hall. His assistant said to him, "Quick, turn, take a picture of the staircase." The photographer turned, saw absolutely nothing, but shot the photo anyway. This is what developed. Now, as you see, it is a photo taken up toward a window at the top of the staircase. Nevertheless, it does have a very definite human shape to it. And people claim that what he had actually captured was a picture of the ghost of Lady Townsend, the second wife of the Marquis of Raynham Hall, who had died in the 1700s, had been seen around the manor ever since, and as recently as 10 years before this photo was taken in 1936. To this day, it still remains one of the best examples of ghost photography. So, if these are things that ghosts aren't, if they're not hoaxes, if they're not accidental optical illusions, if they're not deliberate phenomenon like double exposures, what might ghosts be? People see something. Now, of course, the main explanation, the vernacular, is it is the soul, the spirit of a person who has died, is in the grave, and has come back to the land of the living. I'm actually not going to discuss that definition at all, because it gets into the realm of religion. Because most religions, their tenets are based on the belief in survival after death. And everybody here has different beliefs. Some Eastern religions believe we are reincarnated and come back. Some Christian religions believe that we remain in the grave until the rapture, until the second coming. Still, other Christian faiths believe that, or at least did believe until they changed the rules a couple of years ago, that they might have stayed in limbo or purgatory and worked their way out, depending how many masses were told on their behalf. So, religions have changing beliefs. What is interesting, though, is that at least all Judeo-Christian beliefs believe that if you do see a spirit, it is that there are holy spirits, that saints can return. There are Marian apparitions of Mary, Mother of Christ, returning. That statues do bleed and cry out of their eyes. But if you see a ghost of just a normal person, that's another type of spirit playing tricks on you, because human beings don't come from the other side. So let's set that definition aside for right now. Is there any scientific explanation, possibly, of what people are seeing? And believe it or not, there actually are a couple of theories of what they're seeing. If a person Let me start that again. We know that at the time of death, our body disintegrates. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But we also know of the physics law of the conservation of energy and matter. And matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed, but it can be transferred or transmuted from one form to another. So the matter disintegrates, but what happens to the chemical electrical energy that keeps us going? The thing that keeps us as a spirit, to make me, me, and you, you. Is it possible, usually at the time of death, that energy is dispersed and moves out into the universe? But is it possible that in some very, 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 very rare instances, that energy stays together in some sort of a recognizable form, that people who are sensitive, and that's another code word for mediums, people who are sensitive to spirits, can recognize and identify? There's another possibility that some people think ghosts might be. Some people believe it's not ghosts coming back at all, that what we're seeing never left. That sometimes, in instances of high energy, love, joy, hate, panic, that our aura, our energy, leaves our body and imprints itself on the environment. So what we are seeing today is, in essence, the equivalent of an endless loop of film that's being played over and over again, and we stumble into it. This might explain, for instance, why some ghosts, especially in historical houses, seem to be floating a couple of feet off the ground, or maybe you only see them from the knees up because their feet would be a foot lower, because the house or whatever was on that site at the time that they were alive was actually at a different level. So that's a third possible explanation. And a fourth explanation, and this one is as far out there as believe in ghosts itself, is the theory of time-space continuum that accounts for wormholes. That the universe is not, of course, on a two-dimensional axis, but actually several dimensions. And that space may warp and bend in on itself. So that what we're actually seeing while we're here and we see a ghost is not a ghost from the past or the present, but it's on this continuum happening at the same time. It's not another dimension. That's a whole different science fiction thing. But this is a story where you would actually see something that is ongoing at the same time we are alive. This would explain for the type of ghosts that are when you see an entire army on a battlefield and you blink and then it's gone. Or the famous story of two British tourists who went to Versailles and saw a lot of costumed characters parading around the grounds, and when they talked to the docent found out there were no costume actors playing the parts of 1700s aristocrats. They were actually seeing them at the same time, but in a different time. So those are some possible explanations of what ghosts might be. So why would they bother? I mean, if ghosts are a soul that comes back from the other side, from the grave, from the beyond, what's so great here that they would want to bother to come back? Well, it seems that most ghost stories, and I'm only going to do a few of them, fall into different categories. And here's one of the most popular. It's the story of the hitchhiking ghost. A man is traveling down a highway late at night. He sees a damsel in distress standing by the side of the road. In many instances of the story, she's also soaking wet for no reason. It hasn't been raining. There's no river nearby or pond. But he opens the door, asks her if he can give her a lift. She gets into the back seat. She's chilly because she's damp. He takes off her sports coat, his suit coat, gives it to her. She puts it around her shoulder. She gives him an address. He agrees to drive her to the location. He gets up to the house, and as he does, he looks in his rearview mirror, notices the back seat is empty. Seat's still damp from where she was sitting. He's puzzled. He goes up the sidewalk, knocks on the door. Very similar to the Telly Savalas story I told at the very beginning. Door opens, one or both parents come to the door and say, "We were expecting you." He says, "Excuse me?" He says, "Well, not you precisely, but every year on this date, someone comes to the door. You see, our daughter was killed in an automobile accident. At the point in the road, you tell us you picked her up. And every year, someone picks her up to bring her home." The kicker of this story, in the archetypical version of the story, is that if the man lives locally, the next day he goes to the local cemetery where she's buried, and there on her tombstone, he finds a suit coat neatly draped over the headstone. The most famous version of this story is this woman, Resurrection Mary, who was picked up along a route on Archer Road outside of Chicago between the old O. Henry Ballroom, named for the candy bar, heading toward Joliet, Illinois. Halfway along that track is Resurrection Cemetery. And according to the stories, as the driver passes the cemetery, the girl vanishes from the car or demands to be let out, runs toward the cemetery gates, which of course are locked at night, and passes right through the gates. So Resurrection Mary is the most famous example of an anniversary of an event, that a ghost will come back on the anniversary of when something, not necessarily their death, but most frequently their death. This is another anniversary event. Many people claim that they have seen, again, an inanimate object, the ghost of the funeral train that carried the body of Abraham Lincoln from Washington, D.C. to burial in Springfield, Illinois. There's still a portion of the original track in upstate New York between Albany and Buffalo, and on the nights of that are the anniversary of the date that the train originally passed, some people have seen the silent train passing. And it has even been recorded by journalists who have stood by the side of the road and seen a train go by. Wish I had a train. That would be a great hoax to perpetuate, wouldn't it? So let's go on to another reason they return. Unfinished business. You'll recognize the Warner Brothers Theater, the Pacific 123, right on Hollywood Boulevard. Sam Warner was the brother who decided that talkies were the next big thing. And he personally worked with the sound crew to install the sound into this theater so that the jazz singer could premiere there. But when the sound system wasn't ready in time, Warner cursed the theater. The premiere was actually held in the Warner Theater in Manhattan. While the premiere was going on, Sam Warner suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and died. And it's said to this day that people, especially the night watchmen in the building, will hear his footsteps in his office pounding around, he's still trying to get that sound system working, and that he will walk across the lobby, get into the elevators, the door doesn't open, but he goes in anyway, to head back up to his office. Unfinished business. Another reason they return is of instances of extreme violence. And there are many different variations of this. One of these, of course, are battlefields. World War I soldiers are still seen storming the beaches of Gallipoli. There's a medic who appears going over the hillside that used to go into enemy territory to bring back the wounded. He and his mule are seen on this hillside in Turkey. The Colosseum, tourists will go in and pose with those actors dressed as gladiators, and then the guy disappears because he wasn't really there. He was an original gladiator who has come back. The Bridge of Sighs in Venice, Italy. On this side was the Doge's palace. On the other side was the prison. If people were condemned on this side, they would have to pass across this archway over the canal to go into the dungeon on the other side. And for most people, those two lattice windows were the last view they ever saw of the outside world. And to this day, tourists and gondoliers passing under the Bridge of Sighs in the middle of the night, long after the Tourist Palace Museum is closed, will hear sighs coming out of those windows. Alcatraz is famously haunted in a number of places, especially the solitary confinement cells, which would feel creepy anyway. But the most famous ghost seems to be Al Capone. Now, of course, it's a National Museum. What would you call it? Rangers? Anyway, we'll hear banjo music coming out of the old shower rooms. Apparently, the guards got along famously with Capone. He was a banjo player and used to like to practice because of the acoustics in the old shower room. Now, Capone did not die in Alcatraz. He served out his sentence, was released. He died later in Florida. Why someone would want to return from the other side back to prison is beyond me. But it's another example of imprisonment, of violence, and of course, then there are the murders. Victor Killian was a character actor in the 1930s and 1940s. He suffered the blacklist of the Un-American Activity. He got a little bit of a career back in the 60s and 70s in television. In 1976, he chatted up a stranger in a bar on Hollywood Boulevard. He was lonely, invited the guy back to his room. He was living in the Lido apartments at the time, and they passed down Hollywood Boulevard in front of the Chinese Theater. That night, the unknown assailant, the people in the bar didn't know who it was, didn't recognize the gentleman, could not identify him. Killian was murdered. 3 years later, Killian's ghost started appearing along that one block between Orange Drive and Highland, and especially in the forecourt of the Chinese, it said, looking for his murderer, who remains at large to this day. Another reason ghosts are said to come back is to impart messages and warnings. A great example would be the German actress Elke Sommer, who in 1964 was married to a newspaperman, Joe Hyams. They moved into the Hollywood Hills, well, actually out of the Hollywood Hills of Beverly Hills. And for the day they moved in, at night they would hear strange noises down in the dining room. When they'd go down to examine it or look, there were no intruders, nothing had seemed to be moved, so they chalked it up to coyotes or deer up there in the hills. Until one night, a pounding started on the bedroom door, which got louder and louder and more insistent. Finally, Joe summoned up the courage, went to the door, expecting to see an intruder or attacker on the other side of the door. When he opens it up, smoke was billowing up from downstairs. They escaped out through the upstairs window of their home. Fortunately, they were already into the security system. The fire department arrived shortly, put out the fire. When they went in and inspected, they discovered that the fire had started in that dining room where all the noises had been coming from. And on talk shows, until she went back to Europe, Elke Sommer used to tell Merv Griffin and John Davidson and anyone who would listen to her at the talk shows tell the story that she believed that she and Joe were saved by a friendly spirit somewhere in their house. So we have a couple of reasons. Do we have maybe one more reason why ghosts would come back? Sometimes they just like that, hang around at places where they felt comfortable. This you may recognize as the Pasadena Playhouse. It is the State Theater of Pasadena, and it is haunted by this man, Gilmore Brown, who founded the Pasadena Playhouse in 1937. He lived till 1960 and pretty much he ruled with an iron but friendly fist. And he's just never wanted to say goodbye. The elevator backstage will still stop on the second level where his office was, because backstage, if you know the Pasadena Playhouse, there's the loft, which also has the costume rooms and the other offices upstairs. He used to be on the second level. Even when it's not been called, the elevator will stop there to this day. If every so often, during intermissions, the technicians will come back. All the sound and light controls have been messed around. Never anything nasty, just little pranks to let people know he's still around. And Betty Jean Morris, who's a personal friend and was the house manager for many years there, and would never lie because her father was a magician, told me of many nights where she would close down the club, the theater, and she would set personal belongings down on one table in the lobby. She'd go shut off the lights in the men's room, the ladies' room, check sure that everything was secure, the security system was on. She'd come back and what she had put down is moved to another part of the lobby. She'd tell me how in the years before a computer, when they had to hand count the ticket stubs to match up all their counts at the end of the night, if one of the people in the box office was having trouble making the things match up, all they had to do was say, "Not now, Gilmore, it's late, I gotta get home." The next time, everything added up perfectly. So they believe that Gilmore is still around in spirit. And a lot of spirits stay places, apparently, where they feel at home. Right here in town, the Hollywood Roosevelt is a prime example. There are many, many spirits. I don't have time to go into them, but I'll tell you about two of them. Montgomery Clift stayed there for 3 months while filming From Here to Eternity. He stayed in this room that it turns out it's not a very good picture, but it's room 928. He used to practice the bugle in his room because he had to play it in the movie. To this day, people will call down to the front desk and say, "Would you please send someone up from security and shut that guy up playing in the trumpet in 928? People will see his ghost walking up and down the hallway with his script in hand because that's the way he used to rehearse his lines while he was there. And of course, their most famous guest ghost is a ghost who seems to get around a lot, Marilyn Monroe, who had her first photo shoot by the pool in the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. She used to, as a getaway, live in one of the cabanas, which actually are hotel rooms, but they're the poolside hotel rooms, and especially Suite 1200, which was her favorite room. And in that room, there was a mirror. And shortly after her death, one of the cleaning staff was cleaning it when she noticed a reflection over her shoulder, the indistinguishable, that's not the word I want, the indisputable, thank you, unmistakable image of Marilyn Monroe. Of course, when she turned, no one was standing there. Well, that was too good of a story not to get around. Soon everyone in the hotel knew about it, soon everybody in Hollywood knew about it, and soon tourists were coming to see that mirror, which I first saw by the elevators down by the valets. They have moved it all around. For a time, it was actually in the lobby. And you could go up and see if you could catch Marilyn. The owners, not the current owners, Thompson Hotels have now taken it over, but up till then, the former owners had a sense of humor. As you'll see, they placed a poster of Marilyn on the adjacent wall. So if you stood just right, you could see her standing over top of your shoulder. But Marilyn felt safe there. As I said, she does get around. Her ghost supposedly also appears at the house in which she died in Brentwood, at her crypt in Westwood, and she also appears in the downstairs ladies' washroom in the Knickerbocker Hotel, because there used to be a cafe downstairs, and that's where she used to meet with Joe DiMaggio. In fact, they spent their honeymoon in the Knickerbocker Hotel. So, do the spirits return? Since I started researching about 15 years ago for the books, the ghost legend books that I've written and the ghost story books, literally hundreds of people have come up to me after talks like this and after reading my books and have told me their first-person accounts. But of course, no one has ever come back from the other side to say, proof positive, this is what happens. So we don't know exactly what people are seeing, but they're seeing something. So until we have a better name for it, let's just all agree to call them ghosts.